Hey everyone, I'm Justin Dorfman, and welcome to The Micro Collector, a podcast where I talk with the founders and operators behind some of the most exciting micro brands and independent watch companies. In today's episode, I'm joined by Stephen Lee, founder of DuFrane Watches, an Austin-based independent watch brand known for its thoughtful designs, small batch production, and deeply personal approach to watchmaking. We discuss Stephen's journey from pilot and software sales into watchmaking, how a trip through Europe studying independent brands inspired him to start DuFrane, and why he still designs, assembles, tests, and services every watch himself alongside his son. We also talk about building a brand around Austin culture and history, the philosophy behind staying intentionally small, and the unique showroom experience DuFrane has created for collectors. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe for more conversations with the people behind these incredible watch brands. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Stephen Lee of DuFrane Watches. All right, Stephen, welcome to the Micro Collector podcast. I'm super excited to have you on today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the invite, and I'm excited as well. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think I was just mentioning to you before we hit record how I had seen your brand online on Instagram for some time and always sort of piqued my interest. And at Wind Up in Dallas a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to actually get my hands on some of your pieces. And first of all, I just want to say I was blown away with the designs, the clear attention to detail. And then as I started to do a little bit more research on you and your brand, I learned that you assemble these all yourself. You do everything yourself. And I was just like blown away and had to get you on the podcast and learn more about, your operation over there.
No, well, first of all, thank you so much for your kind words. That means a lot. And I'm a watch fan myself. And so I'm the same way when I finally get to see watches versus, like physically see them and hold them. It's a far cry different world than when just seeing them on a computer screen on a phone. So I'm the same way. They always look way better in person. But yeah, thank you so much for your kind words. And yeah, my son and I do all the assembly. It was a part of the idea of the brand from the get-go. I didn't start it that way. I had someone else here in the States doing the assembly, but as I was kind of getting myself trained and taught up how to do it, I took it over quite a few years ago. And yeah, that's what Mondays and Tuesdays are about here in the DuFrane shop is assembly.
That's very cool. And I spoke to your son. At the time, I didn't know he was your son. That's so cool to see that, you've got this family operation going on over there. It's actually a dream of mine. So I have two sons. I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. My 8-year-old is getting into watches. He's starting to sketch watches and come up with ideas for watches. We've done a little do-it-yourself kits as well, starting to assemble them. I have a dream one day to have a brand with him and with my other son, and I can just imagine them sort of, working the storefront if we have a little store here in Mill Valley.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's again, I didn't know whether or not, I've got 3 boys. They range from 19 to 25. And I didn't expect any of them to be, as interested in this as I am. But I wanted them to make sure that they find their own DuFrane. Whatever that is. Doesn't matter to me what it is, as long as they're happy. But my oldest came to me about a year and a half ago, and they would, my middle one and my oldest would, they would come to me with different shows just to help kind of, man the booth, if you will. And so they got a little bit of, interest and involvement in it, over the last several years. But he came to me and he said, hey, I'd kind of like to get a little bit more involved. And so he's been actually working with me now for right about a year, maybe a little bit more than a year. And he's come a long way. And it's fun for me because it's great to work with my son and get to talk to him more than just the kind of the average, hey, will you please come have dinner with me? Yeah, they got their own lives and they're doing their own things. But so I get to see him, pretty much every day. And he's, like I say, he's come a long way, doing a great job. And it's, there's of course a little bit of pride, a little bit of fun having him in the showroom and handling certain questions and situations. And so, we'll see if that continues on. So it's a lot of fun
That's
though.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, I wanted to take a little step back and, you know, hear about your background. So maybe a little bit about where this passion for watches came from, and then leading up to DuFrane and taking that
Yeah.
leap and actually starting your own brand and going beyond just the enthusiast and collector to somebody that's actually building your own
Yeah.
business
So
around it.
I mean, I always liked watches, even as a kid, and so the name Dufresne is actually my mother's maiden name, just because and a lot of folks just say, "Hey, Stephen Dufresne." They assume which is I would assume the same, but it's actually my mother's maiden name, and she always encouraged this kind of weird fantasy and desire I had to get watches, and you know they weren't nice watches. They were cheap little digital watches at the time. That's in the late 70s, early 80s, that's what it was. And so when I was formulating the idea for the brand, I wanted to kind of have an homage to her. I think the name Dufresne just sounds nice. It has a nice French sound to it. My mother's side of the family, the heritage is French. And so I just like the sound of it, but also as a nod to her kind of encouragement as a child of like, you're going to be one of those guys in New York, aren't you? Anybody want to watch? I got a watch. Here's a red watch. So it made sense to me. But I didn't come from any watchmaking heritage. There was no one in my family that, had any association with watches at all. I'm not a trained designer. My first career, I was a pilot. I mean, I was as far away from kind of the creative side of watch, the watch world, if you will. But I just loved watches and I collected watches. And as I got older, my gateway drug, like a lot of folks, was a tag. That's my first nice Swiss watch was a tag. And so as I got older and was able to start spending a little bit more, money on watches and really started to pique my interest more and more, and took some trips over to Europe with a buddy and did some exploration in Germany and in Switzerland and tried to learn more about the craft itself and the heritage and the history. And, I just started to really consume myself with it. So there was a small little brand in Lucerne, Switzerland called Oxen Junior. So it's not very many people know about it, a very small independent brand. And the experience I had with them is kind of where everything started to kind of come together for me because I kept little notebook, drawings of things that I liked and features I liked and some ideas around watches. But everything clicked at that, meeting this little brand and designing a special custom watch that I had made for me to hand down to my kids. But it was the experience of talking watches. It was the experience of sitting down and having coffee and, you know, bread and cheese plate and designing different aspects and learning more about it and showcasing this very small little boutique experience. And I loved that. I absolutely thought, man, if I could do something like that, because as a consumer, I just loved it. And I wanted to find a way to emulate that. And then fast forward here, whatever that was, 15, 18 years ago, whatever it was, I think I've been able to bring that to market in the sense of not just having watches that hopefully folks enjoy and like, but actually coming to my showroom and having a nice sit down private meeting, no pressure. If you just want to come and play with the watches just to see them for the first time, or if you've got your eye on one and you know what you want, doesn't matter to me. I just love having folks in there and having that experience with them.
Yeah, I saw on your website about the showroom, and I'm gonna ask you a couple questions about that because I think
Sure.
that's really unique and something that's really important in the microbrand space where a lot of these watches are mostly online, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
that opportunity to get them in your hands is important. But digging a little deeper into that journey to creating your first watches. So you went to Europe, you sort of got this vision of something that you wanted to build, right? A business
Yeah.
and a passion. How did you go from that to creating your first watch, right? You had some drawings, but how do you go from that to actually, did you assemble your first watches? I know you do now. Was that,
Yeah.
or did you have partners to help you do that? I'm curious how
Well,
you got started.
just to kind of even kick the brand off, I mean, so I mentioned my first career, I was a pilot. So I flew for a few years and I got tired of that kind of lifestyle because it was a corporate environment, corporate pilot, so flying for a company. And so there was no schedule. And at the time, this will date me some, but that, it was when you had pagers. And so I didn't have a life. I had a pager. And whenever I deet, 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 it was time to go to the airport and, take whoever the executives to fly. So I got tired of traveling all the time. So I decided to go into like technology software sales where I was traveling all the time. So it made zero difference in what I was doing. I was still gone all the time. So I did software technology sales for 20 some years. And during one meeting, I was on a kind of a conference, web meeting, and I kicked the call off over to my, sales engineer at the time. And I literally Googled, how do you start a watch brand? Because I just had to figure out how to do something different than what I was doing. And I did some research. It took a couple of years. It was more than just that Google, of course, but I started buying old junk movements off of eBay. I started teaching myself how watches work, incorporating, again, the trips that I took and things like that. So I was doing quite a bit of research on it. And, you know, the thing that I kind of came to realize is that you're either going to like the designs that I come up with or not. There's nothing I can do about that. There's enough folks in the world that you're going to like certain things. Some folks like red cars and some hate them. So there's nothing I could do about that. But I could make sure that I find, very, very high quality stuff, have a great, experience with my customers and, take care of them in any way that I, can. I never wanted to be very big. So I had kind of the framework of what I wanted to put together, as a business. But I also knew when I was traveling, everywhere I would go and people would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, I'm from Austin, you know, their faces would light up. They just loved Austin and they couldn't wait to go back and visit, or they've got an aunt there, or they're coming this summer, or whatever the case is. So again, and part of my idea of thinking of the brand, I knew I wanted it to be tied to Austin. I love Austin, but also Austin does such a great job promoting itself that people know about certain things in this town just because they've either visited, they've had a good time, they've gone to Barton Springs or Lake Travis, gone skiing, or whatever the case is. So, it wasn't a quick process. It was a long process. It was a lot of kind of educating myself and then trying to figure out how do movements work and how can I go about assembly. But then I had to figure out, how do you actually get all the components, and in this kind of global economy of where did watchmaking go? It left the States, a long time ago. But from a mass production perspective. And so, that was another big learning curve of figuring out which manufacturing, where is manufacturing done? Who can you trust? Who can you not trust? So the first several years was a lot of, wasted money, which a lot of businesses are, but a lot of learning and a lot of wasted money. So
Yeah, interesting. Um, and that first watch, so the first watch that you produced with the DuFrane name on it,
yeah,
logo,
yeah,
you mentioned Austin inspiration. I think I had an Austin name like a lot of your watches.
yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that model and about that experience, finding the manufacturing partners, getting the components together, some of the mistakes you made
yeah,
along
yeah.
the way to getting it, and also how you launched it. How did you find your audience and build awareness of this new
Well,
watch?
that's a whole. I'll get back to your first part, but that in itself is a whole other world, right? So once you figure out manufacturing and you have everything, production wise figured out, well, how are you going to market it? How are you going to find your audience? What I found was that was way harder than the beginning, which is really interesting because it wasn't easy. But trying to figure, and I'm still learning on both sides of it, but I know production a lot better now. But the whole advertising, marketing, that side of the world is it's always changing and it's never easy to figure it out. But so the first piece that I launched was actually called the Bergstrom. So again, I knew I wanted to tie in Austin to and I wanted to tie it in a way because the more research I did around Austin, the more interesting history I found. And so each model that I launch is named after either an Austin historical landmark or historical figure. And so the Bergstrom piece is the name of our international airport. But before that, it was the name of a military base called Bergstrom. But the reason it's named Bergstrom is why I named the watch Bergstrom. And it was the name of the first Austenite killed in World War II. So Captain John August Bergstrom was the first Austenite killed in World War II. So again, there's a great history to all that. And then, but you just come fly here and you land at Bergstrom. Well, there's a whole story behind that. And I thought that was really, really interesting and tried to find a way to tie in my first career as a pilot. I thought a flying or a pilot watch, aviation themed watch would be an interesting starting point. Because when I started in 2010, there were not a lot, but there were several micro brands launching. And a lot of them seemed to have either homage or diver pieces, things like that. And I just thought, I'm going to try something a little bit different, a little bit, more unique in that endeavor. And so the Bergstrom was the first one I launched. It's still in the lineup today. It's on its fourth iteration. It's basically stayed the same. And I always do samples with new pieces so that I make sure that, my drawings and design ideas kind of work in the metal. And there are some changes that took place from the sample to the production because, you get them in your hand and you go, oh, that didn't work. That's ugly or whatever. But the Bergstrom was the first one, followed secondly by the Barton Springs. And again, both of those are still in the lineup today, and they've gone through several iterations though.
Yeah, and now maybe digging a little bit deeper into bringing it to market and building your audience, what were some of the sort of explorations or early experiments that you did to try and build a name for yourself out there? And what was sort of the turning point where you figured out this is my place, this is my channel?
Yeah, it's funny when I first started trying to figure out how to kick this thing, outside of the circle of friends. You know what I'm saying? Like you could sell anything to a circle of friends, but it was from the range of you have to go at it hard. You have to get an entire agency and you got to put, just an untold amount of money behind it, all the way down to, hey, just spend $5 and throw an ad on Facebook. You're gonna be amazed. You know what I mean? Which told me that people didn't really know if it was that far of a gap between the two. But it was a learning process for sure. I tried to do it to begin with on my own, doing my own kind of research and trying to figure out how to make it a productive marketing campaign. But I was also gainfully employed at the time. So there was a little bit of I guess I should say it this way. I had time to figure it out. Okay. I wasn't under any kind of specific crunch time. This has to be launched by a certain time. I had time to kind of experiment and figure it out, which I'm very grateful for. But, it was probably a couple of years before I finally got to a point where I was like, okay, I kind of understand a little bit more about it. And I did actually contract some help, folks that either were really good at creative, which is a very different skill set than advertising, like the actual actioning of ads and how the algorithm works and, what platforms and so forth. So fast forward to today, I do use the Meta platform and the Google platform, and they're very different in kind of how they approach the market. One thing that I stay very clear from, but I think is a huge part of the success of the brand is all of the different, YouTubers and, Reddits and subreddits and vlogs and just all kinds of things that I don't necessarily participate in directly, but people are talking about it and forming their own opinions, whether they've been to the showroom or bought a piece or whatever. And I've always just kind of found that that's important for me to not like introduce myself into those conversations because I want people to have their own opinions. I hope they're good opinions, but I mean, I want them to have their own opinions, good or bad, and not feel like I'm trying to get involved and sway one thing or the other. So there's a lot of call that, organic, I have no impact on that adds certainly to people discovering the brand or hearing about the brand or sharing experiences about the brand. And I think those are probably more important at the end of the day, those types of conversations that people have, than me sending you an ad because you're getting that from me. You're not hearing it from someone else who's had an experience. And so it's an interesting combination. Like I said, over 10 years now with the brand functioning, and it's a mix of all of those things together. If I took one of them out, I'd probably feel it. So they all have to kind of work together for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that the fact that you've stayed out of those organic conversations has a benefit, right? Like you said, it creates a level of authenticity when a enthusiast and then a collector is sharing their experience alone, and you're not sort of trying to push
Yeah.
anything there.
Yeah.
But
Well, if you don't like whatever the color or the bracelet, whatever the case is, I'm not going to get in and try to convince you why. That's your opinion. I want you to have that and feel free to have that. And I take feedback from folks all the time. That's why there's 4 versions of the, Bergstrom. There's, about to be the 4th version of the Barton Spring. So like I take little pieces of feedback that people share and, I can't incorporate everything, but I try to incorporate stuff for sure.
yeah, I think it's interesting like how although you don't participate, you monitor it, right? And then that's really where a lot of the benefits come from, because then you could get the objective, unswayed
Yeah.
opinion of
I've
these
never thought of
collectors.
that. That's right.
Yeah,
Man, I've never even thought about that.
yeah,
I never even came from
interesting.
that perspective. So yeah, that's a great idea. Let me add that to the list. Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. Now tell us about the line as it is today, the collection.
Yeah.
Because now I think you mentioned you started sort of with the pilot watch, and that makes sense given your background and so on. Now it looks like you have several lines in the connection in the
Yeah.
collection that go across dress, pilot, dive, and so on. So maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview of all the watches that make up the collection.
For sure. And that was part of the design as well. Thinking of the brand is that I wanted to have a nice catalog because not everybody likes divers, not everybody likes dress washes. So I always wanted to have a nice kind of cross section of the different styles and designs. And so I've got, 2 divers, the Barton Springs and the Travis, a field watch, which is a titanium Mabry. The pilot watch is the Bergstrom, more of a dressy, kind of dressy sports watch, but still dressy watch, the Waterloo, which is the most popular model that I carry. GMTs, I'm sold out right now, but I have a GMT. I actually have, just real quick, this year, since it's the 10-year anniversary, I had a chronograph that I launched in February. It was a very special 10-year anniversary edition. They all sold out. So I did have a chronograph. Maybe one day I'll bring them back, but that pre-order took place in February and I'm still building them. Like they're not gonna come out until probably late May before I get them all done. But I did have a chronograph. I have 2 GMTs coming this year and another dress watch coming this year. So this year there were 4 releases that, I wanted to do something kind of big for the brand's 10-year anniversary. So there will be another dress watch coming to the lineup and then 2 GMTs, one of which will be a limited run of 100, and then the other one will be in the catalog going forward. It may sell out for a while, but it'll come back and sell out for a while and come back.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the one that I was first drawn to was the Mabry, and specifically the white dial, sort of textured dial on that titanium case and bracelet. Just the sort of contrast of that dial
Hmm.
with that titanium darker metal really caught my eye. And I loved how on the bezel you had the north, south, east, west in white as well. So it sort of like brought that contrast to the case of
Awesome.
the
Good,
watch.
good.
So that one really caught my eye. But then I think, like most people, I also was drawn to the Waterloo, and specifically the copper hammered
Hammered, yeah.
dial. Um, and the rose gold in my case is what I really was drawn to. I'm curious, tell us a little bit about that dial, because that's something that I've never seen before.
Yeah, and I hadn't either. So if the camera will pick it up. So
Yeah.
my wedding band is just a hammered finish. And the Waterloo has been out for several years, and I had a white linen texture dial. And again, it was a very popular piece. When I added this then kind of hammered finished dial, because I hadn't seen that before, I thought it was unique. So this is kind of my interpretation of it. It really, kind of caught on. And so the Waterloo has 6 different variants, right? 3 in the stainless steel silver case and 3 in a rose gold PVD case. So it's like, I think it gives folks a lot of different options because they all look very, very different, even though it's the same kind of base, model. But that hammered dial, it was, it was a nice addition, and I'll always kind of keep it in the lineup with the linen texture as well. But then it did get picked up by the Teddy Baldassar and Kevin O'Leary Microbrand kind of thing that they do once a year. Yeah, those 2 pieces It varies on which one is the most popular, but a lot of folks come in or, you know, reach out online or what have you and talk about those 2 models for sure.
That's super cool. I actually didn't know about that episode, and I'll have to look it up now. I'll link it in the show notes here as well. Was that
Good,
a
yeah.
surprise to you where you like somebody told you, "Hey, you're on Teddy," or like
No,
how
that
did that?
So
Yeah.
I've actually, it's funny. I've known Teddy for years. I've known Teddy since when he started, and actually, he launched an online store, which was mostly centered around microbrands at the time. And I drop ship for him. He hosted my watches on his site. People would buy, and then I would ship directly to him. So, you know, a couple years ago, Nathan Trafford, if you're familiar with Trafford
Mhm.
watches,
Yeah.
okay. So Nathan was invited to be a part of that thing. And I didn't know anything about it until literally one day I was sitting there watching it and I was like, oh, cool. Teddy's got, the microbrand challenge on there. And then lo and behold, Nathan, won that year's competition, if you will. And it completely changed his brand. You can't buy a Trafford right now. You just can't buy them. They're always sold out. They're gone. Now he does a great job with his designs, and they're great watches. So, but the exposure certainly was a big thing. And so as we talked about it, he's like, dude, if you ever get a chance, you got to do it. And so last year, uh, Teddy's team reached out and said, hey, we'd like to invite you to this if you'd be interested. And it's a little funny to say, but like, of course, I wanted to do it, but I also did not want that I this sounds counterintuitive probably to most folks, but I don't want to be big. Okay. I have no desire to be a very big and constantly expanding brand because of some of the things I talked about at the beginning. So I love meeting folks. I love having them in the showroom. My son and I do all the assembly, ourselves. And so there's only so much bandwidth we have. And this is so much fun for me. I enjoy this is I call it my retirement, if you will. But it's so much fun for me that I don't want it to ever turn into work. And so almost hesitated a little bit, but I was like, of course I want to be a part of this. And so I just sent, the piece up but to your point, I was just as surprised as everybody else on the day that the video dropped. They said, hey, okay, it's finally going to drop on this day. You know, you have fun watching it. And so that's exactly what I did. I just watched it, for the first time like everybody else. And it was just so much fun to be a part of it. And the amount of folks that, get introduced to the brand, because those videos, they probably get 1 million, views. And you just, you know, it cost me whatever it was, $40 in shipping. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's that Teddy just is so good for the watch community. I'm just such a big fan of his.
Yeah. I was going to actually ask you about that sort of how you think about growing because I know that assembling the watches, not just assembling, designing, assembling, testing, handling customer service
Yeah, yeah.
and all that is all done by you and your
Mm,
son.
mhm.
And it's very important that it's done by you and your son. I think you've talked a lot about that in videos I've seen in
Yeah.
interviews that,
Yep.
that's how you want to manage the business. On the other side, there's that tension of people loving your watches, right? And it getting
Yeah.
exposure in certain ways. So how do you think about growth? At what point, I guess, do you stop, right? And say that's enough? I don't know if that's an easy
Yeah,
question to
it's
answer, but
there's a part of me that's always super competitive, right? And my whole life I was that way. I was involved in sports and then got into sales, and it's not that I got into sales. I was kind of called to do sales because it's just part of my DNA to be competitive and want to, lead this and lead that. And so again, it's a challenge to kind of temper that little guttural feel that I have where I'm like, let's go, let's go. Let's just blow this thing out. Cause I enjoy what I'm doing so much and I don't want to risk the impact of growth against the customer experience that I'd like to be able to provide. So, there's some bandwidth that we have, but I do have a marketing partner for the advertising things and stuff like that. I have a photographer for photography. So I do outsource a few of those things. It's not a lot, but I rely on some of that. But that whole process of assembly and, creating new designs and new pieces and things like that. I want to hold on to that. I just love doing it. If you reach out on the website, it's me that you're actually talking to. It's not a bot. You get an automated response if it's after hours or something like that, but there's There's no like AI, agent or anything like that. So, people reach out, they have, warranty issue, whatever. Maybe a spring came out of a buckle or something like that. It's me that's actually fixing. I've got three pieces right here that are some are several years old that I'm, going to take a look at and see what's going on with them. So the good thing is not too much happens with these watches because the Salida movements are just phenomenal and things of that nature. But I don't want a call center. I don't want a repair facility. I want to keep all that in house. And so the only way I can do all that is to maintain the size. And if a piece sells out, I'm sorry, it's just sold out for a bit till I get more components in to build more. And then, they'll be available again. That's the way that I'm trying to like manage the growth, if you will. But just because these other components are, they're not scalable. I'm not in this to build a scalable company, which I'm sure Kevin O'Leary would hate to hear. He wouldn't ever want to invest in me at all. But that's just the way that I'm trying to, have fun with the time that I have with this brand is through this, limited growth, having my son a part of it, getting to meet folks and, doing these watch shows and showing people that don't get a chance, to your point earlier, of seeing the pieces in the metal because there's only one showroom. It's just so much fun. I think of it this way, Justin. I make watches, but I sell happiness.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
And I kind of think that's very true with a lot of these micro brands. There's that when you find that watch that really speaks to you. I mean, I sold software for a long time. I didn't have a single customer smile or get so happy that I delivered some software program. But when someone finds a watch that they really, really love and they've been looking for it for a long time, man, that's a great feeling. It's just so much fun to be a part of that. And that's the kind of lightning in a bottle I want to try to keep contained.
Yeah, and it's repeat happiness too, right? Like not just buying software for the first time, but it's not like they're smiling every time they use it.
You're
But a
right.
watch is something where, you look at the time and you look at the face of your watch and you just get this feeling,
Yeah.
man, I
Yeah.
love this watch. Take out your phone, take a wrist
Yeah.
shot.
Wrist
It's
shot.
something that
Right.
continues to deliver, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about the showroom a little bit because I think that's something that's not, I mean, others have showrooms and so on,
Yeah.
but maybe a micro brand at your size and your stage, most don't, I would say, right? I know
Yeah.
it was a vision that you had from the very beginning. When did you open the showroom and tell us what the experience is like there and, if somebody's listening to this or watching this and they want to visit the showroom, how they can go about doing that.
Yeah, for sure. So it's, I mean, the fun of it for me is when folks come in, and the hard part was finding how to represent, what's in my head and the brand and the imagery on the website and the energy that you kind of feel from looking at it and matching that to a showroom, right? And I was looking for one for a while, and I was only finding kind of your typical, strip mall type locations you could lease out and things like that. And I needed to find something because it was to the point where I was meeting folks at coffee shops here, for a couple of years because hey, I'm in Austin. Can I see the pieces? Well, of course, what are you interested in? Oh, I want to see that. And then I'd bring it and they'd say, oh, well, did you also have this? Well, wait right here. I'll be back. I've got to go and get. So it got to a point where I couldn't manage, meeting folks that way any longer. So the place that I found it's not far from me at all from where I live, which is really lucky, very, very super convenient. But it's an 1890 limestone building. It's an old, old building. It's like literally the oldest actively used limestone building left in Austin. If you know anything about Austin, it's just constantly growing and they just tear
Yeah.
things down and put up something new. And so this is one, an old school. It harkens back to the, kind of what Austin was about. It's a beautiful old building and it's got ancient old wood floors that creak just by looking at them. It's just such a great, great building and it matches the brand to a T. It's super comfortable in there. It's a fairly large room, a nice couch, all the watches are on display. It's only booked by appointment only. So when you come in, you're the only one there. So that way you have time to look at everything. It's me and sometimes my son is there. So it's not a retail presence where, it's somebody maybe not as invested in making sure you're happy as what I am. So again, these were the things that I wanted it to be just because as a fan, I would love that. Like if and I think there are some brands that do a really good job of it. I think Nathan does a good job with it. Peter up in Jack Mason up in Dallas does a real good job. So there are some that have these kind of like really curated kind of, showrooms that do a really good job of making you feel comfortable and coming in and just hanging out.
Yeah.
I mean,
I like that
just,
by appointment, being on your own and being in that space and being able to get your like attention and really hear the story of the brand. I think that's quite unique, which is
yeah,
really
yeah,
exciting. And I'll definitely have to stop by and visit when I'm in Austin.
for
I'd love to
sure.
get
And
back to Austin. It's been
there's a table full of bourbon. and so,
nice, even
and
better.
so it's nice to sit and, kind of celebrate and have a toast after someone, again, finally gets the thing that they've been looking
Yeah.
for or looking at and what have you. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
can
for
feel
sure.
the vibe of the showroom, just hearing you talk about it. And I'm really excited to come visit. I came into this conversation a fan of you and the brand. I'm leaving even more so. And
Good, good.
so I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by, to share your story. For those that are listening, I know you mentioned some things that are coming up, a couple new models. Maybe any other shows that you're going to be at? I know you mentioned San Francisco for Wind Up. Any others that folks can meet you in person if they're not able to make it to Austin?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we're here chatting at the end of March, and in May 1st through the 3rd, I'll be in San Francisco at Wind Up, and then I got a little bit of a break, and then come July, shows kick off again. So there's a nice little break in the middle there. But like July is LA for Intersect. There's also the show Heartland in Kansas City, then Wind Up again in New York, and so like there's a lot going on the second half of the year, starting around July. But in the immediate future, in the next month, in May, is Wind Up, and of course the showroom. But yeah, I've got quite a few pieces coming out this year. So man, Justin, I really appreciate you again, having me on and letting me chat about this and sharing a little bit more about the story, and just very, very thankful.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So thanks again and have a great rest of your day over there.
Awesome, awesome. You as well. Thank you, sir.